We're joined once again on the channel by the Israeli government spokesman, Eylon Levy. Mr Levy, many thanks for your time this evening. There are, of course, any number of topics that we could be focusing on, but given that we have heard from the IDF about what took place at the Maghazi refugee camp, I wonder if we might focus the majority of our time on that. What is your understanding as to what took place there on Christmas Eve?
My understanding is, as a military spokesperson has told Israeli television, an incorrect munition was used in that strike. We, of course, do our best to be targeted and precise and to target the Hamas terrorists and do everything to get civilians out of harm's way. And it appears that in this mistake, in war, a mistake was made, and we are learning lessons. One of those lessons is the importance of getting civilians out of harm's way, and that's why since before the beginning of the ground offensive, we have been urging them to go to the Al-Mawasi zone that we have designated as a humanitarian zone. And we've done that because that's an area in the Gaza Strip where Hamas has not already embedded itself under homes, schools, hospitals. And it's important to note that of the 1,500 terror tunnels that we have found, most of them poke out inside schools, hospitals, and UN facilities. And we think it's tragic that UN agencies, instead of working with us to protect civilians by moving them to the designated safe zone, are funneling them into Hamas strongholds instead. There is no reason for anyone to be
Just to keep our focus on Maghazi, if we can. The IDF, speaking to another Israeli broadcaster as the head of the IDF statement, as you say, said the type of munition did not match the nature of the attack. Can you be specific as to what that means? What munition was used by the IDF jets?
I don't know what specific munition we used. When we choose our munitions, we try to adhere very strictly to the international rules of proportionality and distinction and necessity, because this isn't a war against the people of Gaza. It's a war against the monsters who perpetrated the October 7th massacre and have spent every waking day since threatening a repeat of that massacre. In this case, it appears an incorrect munition was used, and we regret the loss of life. We don't want to see more people hurt. That's why we're calling on Hamas to surrender so the war can end immediately. And if Hamas doesn't want to surrender, we want UN agencies to help move civilians into places where they can be safe, instead of sending them into Hamas strongholds and putting them in places where they're in danger.
But given that this was a mistake, a fatal mistake involving dozens of civilians, people that even the IDF in its statement have made clear were not combatants, they weren't being targeted, why an expression of regret from Israel rather than an apology?
We are going after the Hamas terrorists who perpetrated the October 7th massacre, and when we do that, we take every precaution in order to minimize the risk to civilians and trying to get them out of harm's way. Of course, any civilian deaths are regrettable. We don't want to see more people being hurt. That's why we think it's upsetting that UN agencies aren't helping to evacuate them to safe zones, or instead funneling them into strongholds. And we want to see them getting to areas where they can have safety and shelter, because we don't want to see more people being hurt. Would you apologise if, as the IDF is obviously doing at the moment, conducting its own investigations, this was a mistake of epic proportions, one which involved the killing of a number of civilians and which, prima facie, could be a war crime? No, this was a regrettable mistake. This should not have happened. The choice of munition was incorrect. And when we are dealing with a very complicated war zone, an area that I'll remind you is a unique counter-terrorism challenge that no army in the history of the world has had to deal with, it is inevitable that mistakes will be made. We will not apologize for waging this campaign to bring the Hamas terror regime to justice after October 7th and bring back our hostages. And when civilians are caught in the crossfire because Hamas is operating from inside civilian areas, we think that is regrettable.
But in the two statements that we have, the one that was released today and the one on Christmas Eve, IAF fighter jets struck two targets adjacent to which Hamas operatives were located on the 24th of December. 2 days ago, an Israeli army spokesman said, despite the challenges posed by Hamas terrorists operating within these civilian areas, the IDF is committed to international law, including taking feasible steps to minimise harm to civilians. Is it the Israeli position that when such steps are infeasible, as it was in this densely populated area when the wrong munitions were used, that you simply carry on regardless?
It is the Israeli position that we adhere strictly to the rules of proportionality, distinction and necessity under international law. And it's the Israeli position that we want civilians to go to areas where they can be protected. We do not want them inside Hamas strongholds. And we think that UN agencies that are funneling them into Hamas strongholds, instead of cooperating and helping them get to the safe zone, are culpable in the loss of life that could have been avoided if they had cooperated with our plans to get civilians out of harm's way before the ground offensive began.
Sure, but Mr. Levy, haven't you just failed the test that you just set up for yourself? As you say, Israel wishes to be committed to the rules, including proportionality. On this occasion, you did not.
There are only so many times I can repeat that in wars, mistakes are sometimes made. And when those mistakes are made, then like mature, responsible democracies, we say that mistakes were made, that they were regrettable, that we regret any loss of life because we are trying to do everything we can to minimize civilian casualties, while Hamas has a strategy of maximizing casualties, and we continue to learn lessons and step up our efforts to get civilians out of harm's way. And one of those efforts to get civilians out of harm's way is to pressure the UN agencies on the ground that have been funneling civilians into Hamas strongholds to stop being complicit with Hamas's human shield strategy and to help us protect them by moving them into the areas where Hamas is not already operating. And then there is no reason for anyone to be hurt at all, because they will be moved to areas where Hamas is not already hiding, under their homes, under their schools, under their hospitals, and under their mosques, as we continue to expose every single day.
Indeed. Mr. Levy, I am sorry if you feel that I'm labouring the point here, but there is a significant issue around this, because people are making the point that doesn't the incident at the Maghazi camp prove the lie that Israel does all that it can to minimise civilian casualties, and more than that, that there are countless other incidents that have taken place in Gaza since October the 7th that, when the dust settles, need to be looked at just as closely as this one?
To every rule, there is an exception. There was an exception on this case with an incorrect munition that appears to have been used, and we regret the loss of civilian life. And we repeat that we are making extreme lengths to try to keep civilians safe. That's why, for example, we warned people to get out of northern Gaza before the ground offensive began. We could have swooped in while civilians were there, but we wanted to get them out of harm's way. That's why we secured a humanitarian corridor for people to evacuate south while our soldiers were having Hamas firing RPGs at them. That's why we have been operating facilities for Palestinians to tell us if Hamas is holding them as human shields and not letting them get out of the way, and why we continue to urge the international community to stop being complicit with Hamas's human shield strategy and to help civilians get to safety in areas where Hamas cannot hide behind them.
Final one on this, but given the high standards to which Israel is holding itself, if the investigation proves that which the IDF has already suggested, that this was a mistake of catastrophic proportions, would you be able to take the high ground and issue not just a statement of regret, but an apology to the families of those who have died?
I can't give answers to hypothetical questions. What I can say is we are going to continue to make every effort to minimize civilian casualties, despite the fact that we are facing an enemy that is intentionally trying to maximize them. And I want to explain Hamas's human shield strategy and how sick it is. Because for Hamas, civilian deaths are not a tragedy, they are a strategy. Hamas has said openly that it is willing to sacrifice and martyr its civilians because that generates international sympathy, and that sympathy generates the pressure that they think will force Israel to desist and stop fighting to recover the 129 hostages who are still trapped in the Hamas terror dungeons, and stop fighting to bring to justice the monsters who perpetrated the October 7 massacre and have been threatening to repeat that every day since that horrific day when they butchered, burned, massacred and raped so many Israelis.
Indeed. Mr. Levy, I just wonder whether you feel that the tempo of this conflict will continue to increase in the way which it seemingly has over the past few days, or if there is any chance that there will be an end to the violence anytime soon.
Well, if Hamas surrenders, the war can end tomorrow, and we think that the only action
what would a surrender? How would a surrender look? Because that is a significant point there. What would surrender be?
We demand that Hamas lay down its arms, turn over its war criminals for a war crimes tribunal, and release the hostages immediately. But if anyone thinks that this war is going to end with us abandoning our 129 hostages in the hands of the Hamas rapist regime, and leaving that terror regime in power and able to threaten our people as they butchered them on October 7th, then they are sorely mistaken.
Okay, but just to be absolutely clear then, as long as those
atrocities can never return.
Yeah, but just to be absolutely clear then, so long as there is a single hostage in Hamas' hands, we will see bombings likes of which we have seen today, and indeed on Christmas Eve at Maghazi. We will see the ground offensive, such as we've seen over the past 24 hours, operating at the same level. As long as there remain hostages in Hamas' hands, this will continue.
Our campaign, our strategy in this war that Hamas launched against us on October 7th is to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities and bring back the hostages. And we think that allies that want to bring this war to a speedy end, and believe me, everyone in this country wants this war to be over, we just don't have the luxury to end this war with Hamas still in power and the hostages in Gaza. Allies who want this war to be over should be standing by our side as we exercise what President Biden said should be swift, decisive and overwhelming force in order to bring the Hamas terror regime to justice after the atrocities of October 7th and make sure they can never repeat them again.
Mr Levy, we've occupied a lot of your time. Thanks very much for it. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.